Hello, my name is Ian Andrews, and I'm a visual artist based in the United Kingdom. And for 5 years now, I've been collaborating with a particle physicist, Professor Kostas Nikolopoulos from the University of Birmingham. And we've been working on a project called the Sketchbook and the Collider. And we've been trying to find equivalence, or we've been trying to open up a dialogue between our two specialist areas, really. But the art is driven by my attempt to find equivalence between the elemental particles that Professor Nikolopoulos describes and their interactions that create reality, create the universe, the visible universe, and my elemental language of drawing, point moving to become line, line moving to become shape into form, and so on. And it's that intimate connection between the standard model and my language of drawing that has driven the artwork that you're seeing in the exhibition around you at the moment. And some people say, well, why have you been, why get interested in particle physics as an artist? But when you hear someone talk about what they're doing as a particle physicist, my collaborator once said, well, I'm uncovering the building blocks of reality. Now, as an artist, that is profound. And it's difficult to say, oh, well, I'll just finish this landscape drawing and then I'll be with you. It's sort of life-changing. And it's become life-changing for me in the way that I work. I stripped everything I do back down to this elemental visual language of drawing and the basic visual elements and their interactions. We're just going to have a look at a few of the drawings and talk a little bit about the relationship specifically with particle physics. Because the thing that struck me when I first started talking to Kostas was he would talk about particles transforming from one particle into another. He would talk about them decaying from one particle into another, or collision events where they will be split into a range of particles. So there was this constant choreography, this constant transformation going on. And it struck me that if you were to substitute the word drawing in place of particle, it would still make sense and would make sense to me as an artist, because my visual elements are constantly evolving and changing. The point moves to become the line moves to become the shape evolves into three-dimensional form or an illusion of form or whatever. So that felt quite profound in a way and justified the approach. And this was the language that gradually developed. And this is sort of what it's all about, really. This is what I was responding to, the three generations of the quarks, the three generations of the leptons, the force-carrying bosons, and the famous Higgs boson there. And the interesting thing about the particle physics standard model is that it can be rearranged. So it's not fixed entirely yet, as the periodic table is fixed, and discoveries have sort of filled in the gaps, as it were. So this is laid out in a different way with the Higgs in the center, and this would be interactive, not interactive as such, but it would be able to be rotated if it was the actual site. This represented the Higgs in the center. So there are different ways you can visualize it, which show us that it's not yet cast in stone, as it were. It's still an evolving thing. It's an evolving idea. And I'll just, I don't want to spend long on CERN, because Claire will be talking about that. But just to put it in context, this is where the collider is, the main one, the biggest one that's being used at the moment. This is Geneva, the city, and the 27-kilometre tube tunnel that I was talking about. That's current research, as it were. But if we go back to the late 19th century, early 20th century, then the cloud chamber was the main way of finding particle physics. finding the subatomic particles, or at least leaving the traces of them. This is what's so fascinating about it. The fact that you can't see them, you only see the trails they leave, the footprints they leave, if you like. So it is a fascinating decoding task necessary. This is an image from a bubble chamber, which is a slightly more advanced detector through the 50s, 60s and 70s. And one of the privileges I had when I was resident at the University of Birmingham was meeting additional people. This is Gron Tudor Jones, who had a collection of historic bubble chamber images. This is him in his younger days, analysing a series of traces. And these are the traces that will be produced on the early images, which could all be decoded. And one of the fascinating things and the connections that I mentioned was, this is Renée Jones, and this was a photograph I had open in a book that I just happened to be looking at, just an ordinary sort of have you thought about particle physics book, and he recognised the photograph. He said, "Oh, it's Renée Jones. I worked with her at Fermilab in Chicago." And so just a page of a book with an image of a person looking at an image of the photographs, an image of the particles, suddenly became, there was a connection there with someone who stood in front of me, which was just fabulous. Now, this slide really makes it may seem very slight and insignificant, but it's kind of one of the key points. This is, on this side, a page from Paul Klee, who was a Bauhaus master and famous modern artist. And his lecture notes from the Bauhaus were published as The Thinking Eye. And on this side, there's Enrico Fermi's manual on how to recognize some of those things that you just saw, some of the traces in the bubble chamber images. How would you know what particle it was? It wasn't entirely straightforward. People had to be trained to recognize certain things and certain tracks and traces. So Klee was all about taking the line famously, that was his phrase, taking the line for a walk. That's what he was doing with his work. He was interested in forming the process, not the outcome, genesis, the movement of things, the interaction of things. And of course, this is the manual to recognize the very building blocks of reality that we discussed earlier. As Costas described it. So the correspondence between these was a major sort of, oh my God, moment for me. As if it was meant to be that it would be interpreted in drawing terms. And this is Klee first laying out the idea of the line moving, becoming the point moving, becoming the line moving, becoming the shape, and the shape moving, giving a suggestion of 3 dimensions. And I mean, there are other correspondences, of course. Klee constantly talks about movement being, although he produced paintings which are static, nevertheless, it's the movement that is crucial, one thing moving, transforming, and so on. And of course, the particle physics with wave particle duality and the particles constantly changing and transforming their nature, the choreography that goes on at the quantum level. This was a major connection for me. Santiago Ramon y Cajal, an early neuroscientist who wanted to be an artist, but his father wouldn't let him. And he found his art skills. He developed his own photographs. He improved a method of dyeing the microscopic slides and slices through the brain that was first invented by another scientist. But he took his own photographs of the slides and then started to make exquisite drawings, not to produce art as such, but to analyze and try and understand what was going on in these hidden processes. and to try and work out how the mind worked, how the brain functioned, which way information would be flowing down some of these neuronal connections. The surrealists were aware of him and were quite excited about his drawings. And I mean, this is a page from my sketchbook. You can see how influential this artist-scientist crossover would have been for me, and they are just exquisite things. And scientists who want to see, scientists who visualize, not just accumulate data, is a theme and an inspirational underpinning to the project as well. This is Richard Feynman, who famously came up with the Feynman diagrams. This is actually one of his drawings, well, a slide of one of his drawings, which were a guide to how you calculate, but also an attempt to see. And Roger Penrose, another famous mathematician, scientist, who famously kept sketchbooks, and it is jokingly said won the Nobel Prize for a diagram. The amount of text related to this paper was relatively small. And this is the diagram that won him the Nobel Prize. Penrose famously produced impossible three-dimensional figure drawings, the Penrose triangle, and also designed M.C. Escher's Endless Tower, which when I was a student, everybody had prints of on their wall. He became very interested in tessellation, in interlocking shapes. And this led me on a trip to Andalusia to start to reconsider the Islamic geometric tradition and the way that even though they're carved in stone or carved in plaster, the geometric lines as they move just reminded me of clay and the line going for a walk and creating enclosures. In this case, the enclosures can be geometric. Now, you saw earlier that some of the drawings had become quite large, and this is the reason why. This is one of the detectors at CERN. This is the Atlas detector. And I became fascinated by this idea that in order to uncover the tiniest things that we know about subatomic particles, you need machines that are colossally huge. So I thought that my drawings ought to reflect that in a way. And I got the chance at an exhibition last year at Studio Kind in North Devon to produce some drawings which are really rather large. I mean, they're 6 meters square. And this shot of them going up reminded me of the people working on the detector, the Atlas detector at CERN. The other reason the drawings became so large was not only a response to the equipment that I was becoming aware of, but it was also another way of trying to become more involved in this choreography, this constant transformation that I was being introduced to, that is happening at the quantum level. And the idea here was that the drawings would have tiny little visual events. They would be quite detailed if you went up and scrutinized them quite closely. And so that would encourage you to go in and forward and examine the surface, which was scratched and sanded and quite rough and raw in certain places. But then you would need to go back to take in the vast overall circular composition. So you would become an active participant in viewing the drawings, joining the particles on their choreographic transformative journey, taking the line for a walk. The linear drawings were based on the linear accelerators, the LINACs, which have been largely superseded. Those didn't find a place at the Devon show. And this was the other small room at Devon, where I first explored the idea of the moving image pieces being displayed with an almost part of the drawings, which became a major feature of this exhibition here at the Beacon that we're now looking at. The nature of the show, the nature of the space, which was complete opposite to the Devon show. It was low and long, thin walls. And so all of my work was long and thin, referencing linear accelerators, the early detectors. And you can just see in the background there the moving image pieces, which have started to become, I've always made moving image pieces. Obviously, we talk about this constant choreography, this constant transformation of elemental particles, and how I wanted to reflect that in my drawings and the constant transformation of my basic elements. But of course, a drawing ends up being a static object. So I started to create some films where obviously there is actual movement. And yeah, here we go. And then in one exhibition, they were shown separately, but I was keen to have the drawings interacting with the moving image pieces. And so the black surrounding screen and the shadows all become part of the ideas behind the piece. And the shapes, the black shapes that are on the drawings are referencing the shapes within and back. So there's a dialogue between the shapes here and the shapes here. And the format of the films, which I'll just show you some clips of in a moment, move. So the image moves away from the screen. You'll see it in a second. They started to open up this idea, the contrast between classical mechanics and quantum mechanics. Classical mechanics says that this happens, causes that effect, cause and effect. Things happen continuously. One thing leads to another. Quantum mechanics doesn't quite work like that. Electrons, for example, can't just orbit around the nucleus wherever they like. They have set energy levels that they have to drop into. And that idea that things have to be in certain places at certain levels infuses quantum mechanics. The quantum of quantum mechanics means quantity, certain fixed quantities. So the films started off by panning across the larger drawing. That's how I made them. I panned across the drawing, and I was able to move as I was panning across the drawing with the camera. I was able to move in different directions a little bit, go quite in on the side, go up. So I had this continual flow, if you like, which in the editing process were layered one on top of another, so that they then achieved a kind of a jerky, rhythmic jerkiness, which refers to everything having a particular energy level that it has to, a particular quantity that it has to adhere to. So I was trying to make a reference to the difference between classical mechanics and quantum mechanics. So these are some views of my studio showing the curtain is revealed, showing the artist at work, as it were. And we're not going to talk about this too much, but I'm fascinated by the idea of getting more three-dimensional qualities into the drawings. by things being laid on top, or by this flying pages motif, the sketchbook spewing out from its container, literally allowing the pages to spew out in this collision event, pages flying away, and potentially being combined with moving footage as well. These drawings are based on the idea of David Bohm, who came up with the idea to explain some of the weirdness at the quantum level, entanglement, particles being able to communicate or affect one another instantly, which obviously breaks Einstein's theories of relativity and so on. Nothing traveling faster than the speed of light. He tried to explain this by saying, well, particle activity happens on a higher dimensional level, and we operate on 3 dimensions and can't possibly understand higher dimensions. And one of his analogies was that things could be laid out in a normal relationship, causal relationship, but then when they're enfolded in the implicate order, as he called it, explicate, implicate order, then new relationships are formed that can break normal causal laws. And with these drawings, the drawings, there are layers of tracing paper, but they're also rolled up as well. And because they're tracing paper, you can see through them. So you can see elements in a different relationship in the cube areas than you can in the laid out areas, if you like. And although these were a series of static drawings, they also produced a series of films. Again, the films growing from and using the actual drawings, in this case, the fact that drawings on tracing paper want to roll up no matter what you do. So I let them roll up and film them rolling up, if you like. So again, taking the static into actual movement. So the last aspect of what we do, equally important to the art exhibitions, is our educational outreach, educational workshops, which are of 2 main sorts, I suppose. One, and for England, they're designed according to primary and secondary school. So primary would be 10 years and younger, and for secondary, it would be from 12 till 16. So looking at the moment, we're looking at the secondary school ones, but the same would apply in that we try and do them within the exhibitions themselves, so they develop a synergy between the professional display around them and the work that they're doing themselves, which is just as I'm trying to do, is trying to visualize what goes on, this invisible subatomic activity. And we're trying to develop in the students a creative curiosity rather than focusing on narrow specialism. So one discipline informing and having a conversation with another. And they produce idea sheets that explore the different interactions. And with the older students, we focus on the secondary school students, we focus on the forces and the interaction via the forces between the particles, as it were. And this is a good example. Drawing against the restrictions of an elastic band is one way of showing 2 quarks that can't be separated because of the power of the strong force mediated by the gluons. And if you're drawing in that way and you feel that muscle memory of trying to separate something and being unable to do so, then it's another way of learning and remembering and exploring these ideas. We also have where they pass a drawing round based on the surrealist exquisite corpse ideas, and each person transforms or at least adds or subtracts to the drawing that they've been given. So a collaborative drawing, if you like. reinforcing the collaborative nature of much particle physics research. And again, with the older students and with the adults, we do a performance piece where they act out some of the interactions that they've learned about using a shadow screen technique that you can see here, filming the results. So the first one was the a particle gaining mass through its movement in the Higgs field, and the second one was two quarks being separated and finally separated or held together by the strong force, but then separated and a new quarks being created by the energy released. With the primary school students, the students 10 and younger, we focus very much. It's the same technique. They work within the exhibition. They do crits and evaluations and present their work to the other students, just as the older students would. But we concentrate on developing cartoon characters, having become aware of some of the characteristics of the particles. So the electron carrying electricity is drawn in a way or made or collaged in a way that gets that idea across. This is the charm quark. With a smaller, less massive up quark nearby. This is another electron drawing, the gestures of the marks, again expressing the energy of the electricity potentially contained through the movement of an electron. And this is the gluon holding the strong force or exhibiting strong force, carrying the strong force. This is a top quark drawn in a way that it's sunk down to the bottom because it's so heavy, it's so massive, and drawn in a way that the dark marks suggest weight and density. So, if you'd like to know more, please do visit the website associated with the project, the Sketchbook and the Collider.com, and thank you very much for listening.